Um, Greg, are you ready? The next question is directed to you, and asking if you can speak to intersectionalities and how multiple identities really affect your efforts to address institutional racism, and particularly at the UCSF PRC.
I can try. I'm not sure that I have. As I thought about how I wanted to answer this question and talk to some other colleagues at our PRC, I think just like Allison, it's really a work in progress. I think my ideas aren't like the exemplar or the role model, but I can tell you how we've sort of struggled with those issues. I thought maybe I would start by introducing myself, and I'm a white, gay, cisgender man. I also wanted to mention that I'm speaking from land that is the indigenous Great and Rancheria territory of the Southern Pomo people. I just feel like the colonial roots that we have sometimes are related to our anti-racism work and intersectionality in particular. And I also use he, him pronouns. And I mentioned my own sexual orientation and gender identity because I just think that the issue around intersectionality and how multiple identities affect our efforts to address institutional racism, it's a tall and complicated order. And that as a white person, I know that I personally benefit from white privilege, and that we all know that academia is organized and structured around white-centric values, norms, and practices. And that trying to change that, as my co-panelists have mentioned, is really challenging and really tough. And I think our PRC has really been, having discussions and trying to figure out how we can resist that white-centric norms of academic medicine. And that since so much of our work is rooted in community engagement with LGBT communities, we're also really concerned with addressing the whole person, not exclusively working on oppression related to race and ethnicity. And because of our work, a lot of our staff are also coming from the LGBT community, particular LGBT communities of color. And UCSF has part of their anti-racism work is has a tagline that's called "Matter is the minimum," and I think that when that first came out, it really resonated with me because I know Black Lives Matter, of course, it's something we're all concerned about, but I think matter is the bar sets pretty low, and that we really want to celebrate and acknowledge the diversity of our staff and the communities that we work with, and that it's really a privilege to work in an environment that really tries to welcome and celebrates the diversity that our staff bring to our center and the communities that we work with. And I noticed that Lisa Ryan, our community partner, is here, so that's great to see you, Lisa. And personally, as a gay man, especially somebody who came out when Ronald Reagan was president, and all of my research focuses on young gay, bi, and same gender loving and other men who have sex with men from the African American community, and primarily transgender women of color. Intersectionality is on my mind a lot. And we really have tried to do better in our PRC and our division. Sometimes I'll kind of interchange those terms because our PRC and our division are kind of closely intertwined. And we've been trying to really recognize that our anti-racism work isn't just around race and ethnicity, but it's also it also recognizes and celebrates the multiple intersectional identities that we're bringing to our work. And we try to make structural changes in our systems to support and develop our diverse workforce. And really the first thing that we did, and I have to also acknowledge Margarita Lightfoot, who was a previous director. Margarita and I worked closely, I think, putting our anti-racism plans into place, but she was really the spearhead. She was also the division chief at the time, and so was able to bring in some additional monetary resources to our anti-racism work that hadn't been there previously. And I'm lucky to say that Dr. Jesus Ramirez-Valles, who's our new division chief, also shares that vision. And so we're continuing on with the legacy that Margarita left us. really the first thing that we did was to create an anti-racism working group that meets twice a month. And I think it was so interesting to me because it really complemented, I thought, the work of our PRC network anti-racism working group that I've had the pleasure of being a participant in since the beginning. And I come from the PRC meetings, and sometimes I go right into our local anti-racism working group, and just there's so much synergy between the work that both groups are doing. That's really been great to see. And our local anti-racism working group really has two primary objectives. And the first is to provide a safe environment for people to talk about and process the experiences of racism and other kinds of microaggressions that come up in our workplace that could be related to gender or sexual orientation or gender identity, and to really support each other around those microaggressions. And then the second is to promote a more anti-racism work climate. And I think, and I guess I want to say this, and so we did a survey of our whole division around anti-racism that was kind of developed, that was divided into 6 different areas. And one of the things that came up in that survey was around the need where a significant minority of folks in the survey didn't feel like they belonged. And so that was sort of a wake-up call for us. I think we added belonging to our DEIB work, to our DEI. Now I just say DEIB automatically instead of DEI, but to really think about how do we make people feel like they belong. And so, and we then actually funded one of our faculty members to be the DEIB lead for our division, and 10 or 15% of her salary was protected time where she could just work on this. And I think that's really how we're approaching our intersectional anti-racism work, is to really try and create a sense of belonging in our PRC, so that people from all different backgrounds will feel like they belong, and that the white-centric norm of academic medicine and our UCSF campus building that seems pretty like white work stylish, would be open and welcoming to lots of different people, not just people who fit the fit the stereotypical mold. I think I'll end there, and then I could talk more about some of the specifics later on.
To a practical recommendation that you think was really critical or really helpful in your work at your PRC to help things move that step forward, especially as people I know are at various points in this work, and as they may be getting started or maybe experiencing barriers at the institutional level, just trying to think of what are some just really useful practical things that you felt like made a difference or are making a difference, or you hope will be making a difference soon with your PRCs.
Well, I'm happy to start the ball rolling, if that's okay.
Sure.
I can say that I think for us that doing our anti-racism survey was really helpful, and we learned some abstract structural problems that are much more difficult and complex to kind of tackle. But I think that we also realized that there were a few key areas. Like, one of the things that came up is that our staff felt like the decision making in our division was really kind of secretive, and that not enough people were involved in that. And so we made some concrete changes to really open up the decision-making process, to bring more folks onto our division leadership group, and to really share our decisions back with our whole staff more transparently. And we also realized that even though people were comfortable, reporting incidents of microaggressions when they happened, they didn't feel like there was much resolution from that. It was very different from our sexual harassment policies that have very clear guidelines, and HR gets involved, but a lot of things were happening that maybe either didn't rise to the level of an HR issue. And so what we're working on now is to try and create like a bias response team that would work in a restorative justice model to kind of address those things internally, instead of needing to activate this whole HR system that wasn't very satisfying for people. And we also learned that like employee development opportunities didn't seem to be equitably distributed throughout the staff. And so we created a fund of an employee development fund that people could apply for. So if they wanted to go to a conference or take a course, that we could support that in a more broad-based measure, instead of it just being someone's individual supervisor who would have that money. So we tried to make that more equitable across the landscape. But all those changes came from the survey, which I think was really a helpful tool.
So I also want to highlight, and thank you, Mark, for sharing, Maya's comment about opening up spaces for honest communication. And then there's a question in here about how to stay focused in the work.
Well, my feeling, and actually I just realized that Dr. Barbara Green-Najufo is on the call too, and Barbara has been an amazing person, and it helps to have somebody on your staff who kind of also helps you stay focused, because it's easy, I think, to get distracted, and having real experts and passionate people on your team who can always call you back to the primary mission of your anti-racism group or your DEIB work, I think is super helpful. And I think that actually when we had Judy Tan, who's another faculty member, become the official DEIB lead and supported part of her salary, I think that also helped keep the focus going. But I've also noticed that sometimes things wax and wane a little bit too, that there are times when everybody is just super swamped, and maybe we're not quite as active as we want, but then something happens, or somebody turns the tide back to focusing on the work. So I think it varies. Oh, and I did also want to mention that we recently did hire an outside facilitator too, who helped us design a retreat that we had last Monday. And part of that retreat process was helping us prioritize the action steps that came from our survey. And so I agree that having an outside person who's not enmeshed in the complexities of your inner workings really is helpful too, because they can give you an outside perspective on what the priority should be, and they actually helped our group. We had about 40 people in our retreat, and we went through some exercises to kind of prioritize the next steps that we wanted to work on, and that really helped, I think, give us more focus that we're just benefiting from right now. With you at all, but I think one thing that's come up several times both in our work group meetings and sometimes just in personal conversations is that white people are so afraid of being called a racist or being accused of doing something racist, or being that has sometimes dominated, I think, some of our discussions. And so keeping in mind who who racism affects exponentially more, that has been an ongoing discussion in our group too, to just to make it be okay to talk about microaggressions or racist episodes that happen without labeling people, and to try and create a safe space where people's where that keeps the attention on the recipients of racist activities, and not on sometimes we protect the perpetrators more than the recipients of it, and that's a tricky balance to walk. And I don't think we have a great answer to it, but we're working through it. I don't know if that addresses your issue at all, but sometimes I feel like we talk around that issue.
But there's a question around ways to involve community advisory board members or other community partners in anti-racist work.
I remember having a discussion about wanting to take, to show what we were doing for our anti-racism work and bringing it to the CAB and getting their input and ideas about expanding it. I think we had that conversation. I wish I could. I just can't speak with 100% certainty. And the other thing that I think probably happened was we our division funded 3 anti-racism research projects, which were small $5,000 each pilot projects. And I believe that Margarita brought in some CAB members to be on the review committee to decide who would get those grants. But I wasn't directly involved in that because Barbara and I applied for one together. So I was sort of out of that loop. But those are the 2 things that I think we did. If not, we should have. but it does make me think that we could be doing a better job.
And Greg, final thoughts?
I guess my final thought is just around, us trying to support each other in the work, because it can be, very emotionally draining and challenging. And the more that we talk about it and talk about the issues that are going on and the challenges and the opportunities that we're all facing and experiencing, I think that the more we can draw on each other's wisdom and energy is really helpful. So I think that, for people who are interested in this topic, and if you're not coming to the PRC Network Antiracism meetings, please join us. I think we could use some more participants and more ideas, and to keep the work going. So I just would encourage people to get involved in our network-wide work group.